Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Woodman, and I want to welcome you to my YouTube channel. In this video, we are going to talk about how immigrants were labeled as desirable and undesirable. This is important for understanding the preferences of who the United States politicians and elites wanted to immigrate here, and the justifications they provided to classify immigrants in certain ways. Let's go through what the politicians and elites were thinking in the late 1800s. I mentioned in my previous videos that there was a preference for specific types of immigrants to come into the United States, where the immigrants had to fit the image and identity of the country, as well as fulfill the country's economic interests. Immigrants from desirable parts of the world, like Northern Europe, were considered people to help maintain the American way of life. Immigrants from undesirable parts of the world, like Asia or Southern and Eastern Europe, would destroy it. Even if they remained non-citizen laborers like the Chinese and the Japanese, they would overrun white society if allowed to enter the United States in sufficient numbers. So immigration became an additional link in the citizenship voting chain. Since the wrong kind of immigrant could become the wrong kind of citizen and vote for the wrong kind of candidate, it was better to keep them out to start with. But for those who did find their way into the country, they could not be allowed to find their way to the ballot box. It was like survival of the fittest. White supremacists needed justification, however, something scientific to prove they were not just trying to hold onto power for its own sake. In fact, they wanted to use science to prove they deserve to have as much power as they can. For that, they turned to a man named Herbert Spencer. Spencer had taken Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection developed on the Galapagos Islands, where Darwin noticed that finches had evolved differently on different islands based on what food was available and what shape beak was ideal to get it. When he returned from his 5-year voyage, he wrote his classic treatise, quote, on the origin of species or the preservation of favored races in the struggle of life, unquote. Darwin claimed that species evolved slowly over hundreds or thousands of years to adapt to the conditions under which they must live. Those that fail to adapt wither away and die out. The first printing sold out on the first day of publication in 1858. Darwin's work was praised by many and condemned by some, but changed science forever. It had a pretty big impact on religion too. Spencer decided that Darwin's ideas about the development of species could be applied to existing species, namely people. Spencer claimed that people who succeeded deserved to succeed because they were more fit, and people who failed also deserved it because they were less fit. If the natural course were allowed to proceed, those less fit groups would wither away and die out, and only the superior groups would be left. Spencer, not Darwin, coined the phrase survival of the fittest. When we think about it, it is no wonder that men like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller became supporters of Spencer's work. Spencer told them that they were rich and powerful because they deserved to be rich and powerful. He said, quote, when I visited the United States, Carnegie and Rockefeller treated me like visiting royalty. Rockefeller even gave a sermon in Sunday school praising my work. As it should be, I must say, the fittest extolling the fittest, unquote. So how does all of this connect to immigration? According to Spencer, the worst thing a society could do was to support unfit groups. The poor, African Americans, immigrants from the wrong countries, by giving them food, shelter, education, or medical care. If any among these groups were fit, they would find a way to survive. For the rest, they would wither away and die off, as nature intended. If you help them breed and proliferate, it would mean the destruction of society. The unfit would overwhelm the earth, a very appealing theory to some people. But social Darwinism, as it came to be known, was a total perversion of Darwin's theories. Darwin was describing a longing, slow process where individual changes, mutations, eventually after hundreds or even thousands of years, spawned new species. Mutations did not matter in Spencer's theory. Darwin was not talking about survival of the fittest, but rather survival of the strongest and most brutal, more war than evolution. He said, quote, "The man was a fool. There is no good or bad in natural selection. It is a question of adaptation, not manipulation." But sadly, Spencer wasn't alone. One of the wars came from my family, unquote. Another place rich and powerful Americans looked to justify keeping the nation pure, meaning white, was the eugenics movement, which said the human race would be improved by selective breeding and harmed if the inferior were allowed to breed with the superior. The eugenics movement began by Francis Galton, a cousin to Charles Darwin and a recognized genius across many scientific fields, although genetics did not turn out to be one of them. The eugenics movement spawned a ferocious anti-immigration movement. Madison Grant, a Yale-educated naturalist and leader of the National Parks movement, and Henry Fairfield Osborn, president of the American Museum of Natural History in New York, pushed to deny entry to inferior races to prevent the nation from descending into a racial abyss. As you can see, the way immigrants were labeled as desirable or undesirable in late 1800s reveals how immigration policy was tied to race, power, and fear of change rather than fairness or true science. Politicians and elites use these labels to protect what they defined as the American way of life, which largely meant preserving white dominance and political control. By linking immigration to citizenship and voting, they justified excluding entire groups of people before they ever had a chance to participate in American society. To legitimize these exclusions, supporters of white supremacy turned to distorted scientific theories like social Darwinism and eugenics. Thinkers such as Herbert Spencer misapplied Darwin's ideas to human societies by arguing that people who succeeded deserved to succeed because they were more fit. And people who failed also deserved it because they were less fit. Wealthy and powerful people embrace these ideas because they reinforce a belief that success and dominance were deserved, while the opposite of them meant inferiority. The eugenics movement further intensified these beliefs by portraying immigrants from certain regions as threats to the nation's future and pushing for policies that kept America pure. These theories were not about science or progress, but instead were tools used to justify discrimination and exclusion. Understanding this context helps us see how fear and false ideas contributed to shaping immigration policy and why questioning those ideas remains essential when discussing immigration and citizenship today. This also makes us consider how bad actors use this as an excuse not to help people who are struggling with something by saying that they inherently deserve to struggle and fail. When we use degrading language to categorize certain immigrants as inferior, it is intended to make them not belong in the country. In the next video, we will look at a Supreme Court case that dealt with birthright citizenship for immigrants. Until then, please like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and turn on the post notifications so you will be notified when I post my next video. I appreciate your support. Remember, you are powerful, you are capable, and you are the change maker our society needs. Thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you soon.